Davy. I'm awesome. Welcome to Davy's Awesome Wrestling, where I review wrestling-related things, all from the perspective of a fan, not an insider. This week, reviewing a documentary that you can currently see on Peacock. A short documentary about the Brothers of Destruction. It was an interesting documentary, as this wasn't like most, where it was just going around getting a bunch of perspectives from everybody else. It was literally just Mark Calloway, Glenn Jacobs, met together, sat across from each other, had a conversation. I'm sure there was somebody behind the camera leading it, but that's basically all it was. Just them talking about their careers. Starting with Kane bringing up his first impression of The Undertaker when he first debuted at the Survivor Series with Ted DiBiase being on his team, and how he was just so big and destructive and the character was just so great, and talking about how that character just grew and grew and grew. And then the point of when they first met, Glenn Jacobs is performing as Unabomb in Smoky Mountain Wrestling, which was Jim Cornette's old wrestling promotion he used to have. That was basically the developmental territory before there was such a thing. Like, this is before OVW or FCW or now NXT, but Jim Cornette worked for WWE, had his own little promotion, and was basically getting talent from WWE, sending talent to WWE, like their little feeder system. And one of their guys that was taken off was Glenn Jacobs as Unabomb, so they thought a perfect match would be The Undertaker come down to Smoky Mountain and have a match with Unabomb. And Undertaker was very impressed with him. Even told Vince McMahon, we should get this guy. And Vince McMahon listens to him, decides to have Glenn Jacobs come up to the WWF at the time, and he's going to debut him as Isaac Yankem DDS. Mark Calloway, talking about it, couldn't help but laugh and ask, was that your idea? And Glenn, of course, says no, not his idea. He didn't like it at all. He was like, there's not much I can do with this, but he tried. He gave it an effort, did what he could with the character, even though he hated it, had a positive attitude as far as Vince McMahon could see, hoping that Vince McMahon eventually let him stop being Isaac Yankem DDS and do something better. And Mark Calloway talked about, as The Undertaker, even he would pull Vince aside and be like, dude, this is stupid. This is not going to work. But this guy's great. He can do better than this. And then they both started just going into how he became Kane. Which to me is a little disappointing. Like, you could have also brought up how stupid it was that they made Glenn Jacobs fake Diesel, but okay, I guess we'll just ignore that. I'm sure Glenn Jacobs appreciated that. Then, from their perspective, coming up with Kane, how Bruce Pritchard had gone to The Undertaker, and they don't remember who they were getting him ready for, but they said he needed an opponent of some sort before he got there, and came up with the idea of his brother, Kane, who he thought was dead, and Paul Bearer was going to bring back to feud with him, and Mark Calloway was all about it, like, yes, this sounds great. Although at first his name was going to be Inferno, and then Bruce Pritchard and Undertaker thought, you know what, as a little nod to his debut, let's call him Kane. Because Undertaker's original name was Kane the Undertaker for his first match, and then they just lopped off Kane, stuck with The Undertaker. I think that worked better. And then it was even cool, it kind of showed some backstage training videos of getting Glenn Jacobs ready to be Kane. Like doing some of The Undertaker's moves and stuff, like, because they're brothers. And how supposedly it was supposed to be a one-off. That's what The Undertaker was told, that was what Glenn Jacobs was told. This was supposed to be something they did for a couple of months, and when it was over, that was it. But Glenn Jacobs had other ideas. He finally had something he could sink his teeth into, and he worked with it. Although it is a little disappointing it didn't really go into of how he convinced them to let him keep doing it. Went into how they got to WrestleMania 14, and even though Kane lost the match, it was an incredible feat that for the first time, somebody kicked out of a tombstone. In fact, he kicked out of it twice. Took 3 tombstones to finally put Kane down. And back then, that was a big deal. Unlike now, when everybody kicks out of everybody's finisher. And they talked about some of their interesting angles, like they kept it going. Stuff like Paul Bearer and Kane digging up Undertaker's parents and them having the match over that. It was cool, but it was also kind of silly. They went into the Inferno match, which both of them were kind of afraid to do, especially The Undertaker. It's fire. Not to mention talking about, flame around you kind of sucks up the oxygen. And then when they started going on different paths, though, Glenn Jacobs talking about how, not really angry, but kind of like that, like, oh, dang it. Because the night he won his first WWF Championship was also the night of the famous Hell in a Cell match between The Undertaker and Mick Foley. They talked about that, and how Undertaker was scared that Mick Foley was really, really hurt. Then, of course, went into The Undertaker doing his American Badass persona, which was a fresh take on The Undertaker. That's the biggest reason for Undertaker's longevity, is he was able to reinvent himself constantly. Sometimes in small ways, sometimes in big ways. But as the American Badass, they finally convinced him to let them form a team, instead of being opponents, the Brothers of Destruction. Then went into when Kane finally unmasked, which he didn't want to do at first because the whole thing was the mask was supposed to hide his scarred, charred face. But then he came up with the idea of make him a monster mentally, in that he wore the mask because in his mind he's scarred, but in real life he's not. It added a great touch. Then the two of them talked about The Undertaker's streak ending. Glenn wanting to know Mark's perspective of it. Glenn didn't like it either. Mark Holloway talking about how he showed up that day being told his streak was going to continue, and then being told right before the match, and him saying, I don't think Brock Lesnar needs it, but Vince insisting, so he did what he was told, and still doesn't think it was a good idea. Because it wasn't. It was a dumb idea. Brock Lesnar did not need that streak. He even talked about the only other time he's lost at WrestleMania to Roman Reigns, whereas he felt it wasn't a great match because he just didn't have it in him at that point in time. He felt that should have been the one to end his streak. He felt Roman should have ended his streak because that would have put him at the next level. But really, for Roman to beat The Undertaker, yeah, it's a big feat, but it's not that big a deal when you're number 2. And they talked about the infamous Brothers of Destruction versus DX match. A match where basically everything that could have gone wrong went wrong. From Kane's mask coming off, to Triple H tearing his pectoral muscle. Just a really, really bad day at the office. A day all of them had been hoping for because they'd wanted DX versus Brothers of Destruction for a long time. Just came a few years too late. And then that's kind of where it ended. The two of them laughing, shaking hands, and leaving. Like I said, this was a quick documentary. It was only about 47 minutes long. But I will say, it was kind of cool. I mean, all the stories, if you're a wrestling fan like me, you've heard before, but you're getting to hear it from their perspective together. It was almost not really a documentary, but more just us getting to sit there and watch a couple of guys reminisce about their careers together. Talking about how, if it wasn't for The Undertaker, Glenn Jacobs would never have gotten anywhere, and if it wasn't for Kane, he feels like he might have still continued, but he definitely needed something to help him because it was getting stagnant. And the two of them, whether they were opponents or they were teammates, they played very well off of each other for many years. It was a very awesome and nostalgic thing. As a wrestling fan who grew up watching Brothers of Destruction from their inception, it was just cool to sit there and watch these two reminisce and basically feel like I was a fly on the wall watching it. So, if by now you have not seen the documentary Brothers of Destruction, it's on Peacock. Do yourself a favor and go check out the documentary Brothers of Destruction. So there you have it. That's my wrestling review this week. Hope you guys enjoyed it. And if you did, make sure to hit like, hit subscribe, hit the little bell so you get notifications for when I post new videos. And leave a comment tag and respond to in my next comment corner. Tell me what you thought of the Brothers of Destruction documentary. Tell me about some other team or rivals that you would like to watch just sit down and reminisce about their time together. Love you guys.